Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the chapter from Everything's an Argument on arguments of fact. So I hope you're excited because I really am. Clearly you can tell from my voice and mannerisms. So let's dive right in. I'll take it to a share screen. I always want to remind you before I go to the share screen though, to pause where you need to pause so that you can get the ideas and concepts down. And also, if any questions arise, to please contact me, email, Zoom, whatever works best for you. And preferably before an essay is due, so that way you can understand these concepts a little bit more clearly. But anyway, here we go. All right. So. All right, so chapter 8 talks about arguments of fact. So what are factual arguments? Well, they're motivated by curiosity. They usually involve hypotheses, right? Which are tentative or plausible statements of fact whose merits need to be examined more closely, and they require diligent research. So if you look at the word hypothesis, guess what word it has in it? Yes, that's right. Thesis, right? So it's essentially a nascent, a beginning argument that you are then going to research and study and find more facts about, so that you can support it, right? So that if it rings true, then it's a solid hypothesis, right? Just like in your essay, if you find great research to support your thesis, it's a solid thesis. So they're pretty similar in that regard. Factual arguments also address questions about how we understand the past, right? So one of the big ones is like the millennial argument, right? And I know most everyone in this room now is now Gen Z, but I'm a millennial, a very old millennial. But so I will kind of, attack this. You have the boomer generation, and now we have like that whole okay boomer, joke. But we have boomers kind of saying like, oh, millennials are the world's problems. They're doing all these things wrong. Meanwhile, right, the boomers lost every war, voted in every corrupt politician, did all the drugs, trashed the economy, left future generations drowning in debt, right? If we did research and saw that those facts to be true, right, we'd realize that it is not millennials that are the problem, right? But perhaps someone else or some other mechanism. All right, so let's keep going, right? Factual arguments also counterbalance what's misreported, right? Back when Obama was president and Trump was ranting and raving about how he was quote unquote a Muslim, or he was quote unquote born in Kenya, which one would be an obstacle to the presidency, the other one wouldn't be a problem. But either way, they were not factual claims. And so repeatedly, in so many different ways, research and fact checking was done to show that yes, Obama was born in the United States, and no, he is in fact not a Muslim, right? Factual arguments report on what has been recently discovered, and explore the implications of such discoveries, right? They precede other forms of analysis, and know that the interpretation of facts determines the consequences of actions, right? So in other words, let's just live in a fantasy world where the things that come out of Trump's mouth are factual and accurate all the time. And that Obama, in fact, was born in Kenya, right? Had that really been the case, he would have had to concede the presidency, right? In the same way that when Nixon was found to be a liar, he had to concede the presidency. So, when we find out things, they can have little consequences, but they can also have very big, far-reaching consequences. All right, even more about factual arguments. They are used to make informed decisions and educate the public. This is why it's so important that we get them from reliable sources. not Google, right? Not QAnon, not whatever wacky conspiracy theory, right-wing nutso place that people are finding them nowadays, which just makes me want to cry, but from vetted sources, right? From vetted sources. So that we can make informed decisions and we can educate the public, right? Look at what's going on in our world right now. If people just actually like looked at facts and factual arguments about wearing masks, right? And the information that, it took 7 months for Fauci to come out and say, if we all wore masks, like this horrific pandemic would not be the problem that it is, and 200,000 plus people wouldn't be dead in our country. That would be a good thing, right? That would change the course of history. That would change the course of so many people's lives, right? Think of how many lives we could have saved had we said that earlier on. But no, you have, again, you have people saying things like that masks are a hoax, and that to drink bleach to save yourself from COVID. And that's it's created a nightmare in our country, right? So factual arguments, facts, newsflash, facts are important, right? They save lives. And then we have corrective arguments. These are a type of factual argument. And with corrective arguments, they challenge beliefs that are common in a society, but that are also based on faulty or inadequate information, right? So like the Fauci thing, that would be an example of a corrective argument, where you had all these people running around saying, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to go to this function full of people maskless and then spread COVID like wildfire, right? Like, to then have someone come out and say, well, no, like actually if everyone wore a mask, like, and it was required, like that everyone, every time they go outside, wear a mask, we could save a bunch of people's lives. That would be correcting the mistakes that we made in the past, right? They work to broaden the audience's perspective, right? They help us to make more informed judgments from better information, and they remind us that our society is not run justly, fairly, or perfectly, clearly, right? That's why we're always having to update the information that we have, test new hypotheses, try out new experimentation, right? To make sure that we're doing the best for our society. So some people will say things like, well, they didn't tell us to wear masks in the beginning. Well, yeah, that's because this was a brand new form of a pandemic, a brand new form of an illness that we'd never seen before. And so we didn't have all of the information about it a month in, especially when some of the information about that disease was kept from us. And so we were going off of the best information we had. Now that, we have so many people researching this, and qualified people researching this, right? Not radio personalities, not people who don't, who are trying to appeal to false authority, who are trying to spread misinformation, but actual, scientists and people whose careers and lives are devoted to these kinds of studies, right? Then we see, right, we can make more informed judgments, but that those people don't always get the biggest podium, right? Like the people who have the answers, who are doing the work, who are trying to save lives, they're not always the ones with the 5 million Instagram followers, So our society is clearly not run justly, fairly, or perfectly in that regard. Does that mean we don't listen to those people because what they're saying is, I don't know, not what we want to hear? No, right? Like we should be doing the things that save lives, whether we want to hear them or not. Just a thought. All right. So how do we develop a factual argument? Well, you have to consider what kinds of evidence you'll use. Not Googled evidence, right? Like that should be the first thing you come up with. If you want to look at politics particularly, choose reputable fact-checking organizations like PolitiFact or FactCheck, right? I've said this in videos before, I'll say it again. Don't go to infotainment political websites. Don't go to Fox News, don't go to CNN, don't go to MSNBC, because if you even just look, first of all, read a book. Like, just please read. Like, watching the news, watching videos, right? Like, that is not working our analytical critically thinking muscles the way that we should be, right? Read, expand your mind. Don't always go to some screen where you can just, like, turn catatonic and let the information wash over you like so many gallons of urine, right? Like, read, like, research, do adequate research, so that you can have the skills, the knowledge, the ability to understand these facts, right? Because factual arguments are shaped by so many things, but two major things are occasion and argument, right? um the facts that exist today are not the facts that existed 2 years ago. COVID-19 didn't exist 2 years ago. So if you would have said, like, well, that's like saying, like, and I'm sure people are making this argument, it makes me want to cry, but, like, what if, I'm sure there are people out there who are like, well, I didn't have to wear a mask a year ago. I didn't have to wear a mask when SARS was around. I didn't have to wear a mask when Ebola happened. And it's like, yeah, because at the time we had a government that made sure that those didn't make it to our mainland in a catastrophic way, right? The occasion was not there, right? But they're also shaped by audience. Again, if we would have had an audience that listened to scientists and that believed scientists, we would not be in the predicament we are in right now. We wouldn't have 200,000 people in climbing dead. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk about identifying issues, right? If you are doing research and you want to look for a particular issue, and I'm going to tell you right now, for essays 3 and 4, the annotated bibliography and the final research essay, you have to identify an issue. I want you to look for issues that are unique. Either they're aberrant, they're extraordinary, they're off, they're strange, right? You don't want to go with an issue that is, let's say, obvious, right? Like, so if you say, like, racism is bad, right? Like, hopefully everyone in the universe is going to go, yes, I agree with you, right? Unless they are awful human beings. Like, you want to find something a little bit more specific than that. Look for issues that intrigue you, right? And look for issues that challenge your audience and offer fresh ideas. They don't just say what's already been said for the last 40 years. By the way, my dogs are play fighting in the background, if you can hear that. For example, don't argue for something like the benefit of wearing seatbelts, because, like, clearly, right, seatbelts save lives. So do masks, but, so that, I guess it's like saying don't, I never mind. I'm on a whole rant today. I'll curb it. I don't know, to cater to somebody's delicate sensibilities out there who would rather, let people die than cover your mouth. Anyway, also consider whether or not your argument of fact is also an argument of definition. When we talk about arguments of definition, if we're defining something a certain way, then that's going to change how that affects other things, right? We talked about that with arguments of definition and causal arguments. So if your argument of fact is also an argument of definition, that changes where we go from here. In terms of researching your hypothesis, remember, hypotheses are works in progress, just like your thesis and an essay is. The more research writing and revising you do, the more your hypothesis or your thesis should change over time. It should become more streamlined, and it should be more specific the more research you do. So go with more qualifying words and expressions. And you should see those around page 161 in this chapter of Everything's an Argument. So that's why when we go to Google and we find those ridiculous websites that are like 10 ways to stop learned helplessness, right? Like those don't help because they're not rigorous. They're not complex. They're generic. They're cliche. They're not written typically by someone who's an expert in the field. They're not verifiable, right? They're not reliable. So avoid that. Find reputable sources, right? And read. And when you read through those sources, when you actually challenge yourself to read and not just, again, be washed upon by the urine of a screen telling you what to think, when you read those readings in their full context, make sure when you apply those comments and those quotes to your essay, you apply them in the full context in which they're written so that they make sense. And then you analyze what you've shared, not what you think it says, but what you've actually shared so that it all makes sense. So how do we decide what evidence to use? Well, use different types of sources, right? If you use, again, if you all you do is go to a bunch of Google sites, that is stacking the deck, right? And it's stacking the deck in a really flimsy way. So you want to present your most compelling evidence as powerfully and persuasively as possible. But don't fill up space with fluff hooks or unnecessary information. The more you do that, the less space you're giving your essay to present thoughtful research and to present heavily regarded analysis and to present your unique claims. So keep that in mind. When you present your evidence, your goal is to educate and persuade your audience, not to simply rattle off a bunch of facts, right? We're not in 5th grade. We're not writing a book report. So we're not just here to tell people so-and-so was born at this time and did this and did that, right? Like you want to have a reason for the research you're doing. You want to have a purpose for it. And that purpose is to persuade your audience and to educate them so that they agree with the place you're coming from, right? It establishes credibility. It establishes appeal to ethos. Because if you've done the work, right, your audience is more likely to believe you. If I came in and said, I've never taught a day in my life, but I'm a maverick, right? Like I'm gonna just totally revolutionize this whole teaching thing. But I have no clue how to teach. I've never read any works of English. I've never published for that matter, right? Which I've done all those things, parentheses. But if I came in and said, oh yeah, all those things that are required of a professional in my field to teach you how to write an essay, yep, no clue. You would go, why? No, I don't want you to teach my English class, like, yeah, you may hate some of the comments I write on your essays, but you know that I'm right because I've been doing this a long time, right? Like, that I know the difference between when to use a comma and when not to. Whereas some of the research we're finding on places like Google, they don't know the difference between the stuff they're telling you. They're just telling you a lot of times for the purposes of generating revenue, to get clicks to their site, right? And so you want to avoid that. If you have the opportunity to use design and visuals, keep that in mind. And think about, like the infographics that you're using and or sharing, right? And that is that. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I'm trying to drive some points home as sort of enthusiastically as I can. I'll take it off of stop share now. As always, if you have questions or concerns, please feel free to contact me. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. All right, bye.